Riley walked right up to me. He looked me directly in the eye and he said, "Master." And when he said master, I remember my first thought was, who's the master here? And then I had this sensation just run through my body. It was like something just cascaded down through my body is the best way I can describe it. All of a sudden, I see this body of light that's floating above his physical body. And I kept rubbing my eyes, trying to get that to go away. I was like, what the heck am I seeing? What's going on here? And the minute I asked the question in my head, I heard this little boy's voice in my head. And he said, "That's my light body. You're here to put my light body back into my physical body."
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Suzy Miller with us on the show today. Suzy's a former speech language pathologist and author of the groundbreaking book, Awesomism, A New Way to Understand Autism. Over the years, many mothers and grandmothers of autistic children have come to me seeking telepathic communication and energetic healing for their loved ones. They want to understand their children's wants and needs on a deeper level. So I'm excited to explore how Suzy connects with these children and supports their families. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now, let's go talk with Suzy. Suzy, welcome to the show. I'm so thrilled to have you join us today.
Thanks for having me, Julie.
You say there's a profound spiritual dimension to children on the autism spectrum. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when I first had my experience with Riley back in 99, it was very clear to me that, these kids were not what we perceive them to be. So in that particular instance, I went into a situation as a pediatric speech language pathologist thinking that we're all human beings. We're all just, quote unquote, just human. And here was this kid who, number one, had the ability to see a mastery in me that I didn't know I had myself, and also someone who was able to take me through a process that was deeply spiritual. It was deeply how do I say, it was not of this world. Yeah. And so from that moment forward, it was very clear to me that at least that particular soul had a significantly spiritual bent to him. He had, and by spiritual, I mean not religious, not um, what I call woo-woo spirituality kind of thing, but he actually had access to other worlds and other dimensions and other realities. And he knew what those were, and he could express those and share those with me. And that has been the norm, well over 10,000 families later. They all have this ability to be connected to the unseen, you might say, and to connect us to the unseen.
Are these children primarily nonverbal, or are they all across the board? Are they high functioning, medium functioning, low functioning?
The ones that present usually with telepathy and some of those kinds of skills, those children are typically nonverbal or non-speaking individuals. But quite honestly, everybody that I've interacted with over the last 30 years has been able to give telepathic information, regardless of whether they were speakers or non-speakers, spellers, or anything in between. I think by virtue of the fact that a non-speaker doesn't have that way of communicating, it's just like a blind person who doesn't have eyes to see. They're gonna become more sensory aware of their environment, right? They can feel more acutely than we can feel, or they can smell more acutely than we can smell. For children who don't have verbal communication, I think telepathy is, you know, you might say both a workaround for that inability to verbally communicate, but also an invitation for us to know that that's accessible within all of us.
Can you tell us about Riley and tell us what he communicated to you? What was different about this child with whom you were working and the trajectory then that it just fostered throughout the rest of your career?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't be talking to you today if I hadn't met him. So
How old was
that's
he when you met him?
he was 4. Yeah. So, basically, I was a pediatric speech language pathologist. I had a private practice in the state of Maine. I was doing very well in that private practice, and I would be given different children to put on my caseload from different agencies, government agencies, schools, that kind of thing. And Riley was one of those children that was, shared with me. And I went to see him in his daycare center for the first time. And when I walked in, I'm looking through the eyes of a speech language pathologist and a speech pathologist who graduated with my master's degree in 1986. So in 1986, there w- the incidence of autism was 1 in 10,000. We had no training. There was no need to have a training or any kind of education because there weren't any kids, to speak of. It was rare. So when I saw him for the first time, he's cute little adorable kid, brown hair, big brown eyes. And he's walking in the daycare and he's going, "It's the millennium. It's 1999." And I'm going, "Okay, this little weird kid," right? He just showed up a little bit strange. And so I walked over to the daycare provider. He was going to introduce me to Riley. And as I walked over to the daycare provider, Riley walked right up to me, looked me directly in the eyes, which after that, I realized kids on the spectrum don't look you in the eye. But he looked me directly in the eye and he said, "Master." And when he said master, I remember my first thought was, who's the master here? And then I had this sensation just run through my body. It was like something just cascaded down through my body, is the best way I can describe it. And so I shook that off, and I took his hand and I took him to the back of the daycare center. I closed the door. He clearly wanted to be in the front with his friends. And so I sat with my back against the door so that he could walk around, get used to me, and I could get used to him. And while he's walking, he's still saying, "It's the millennium, it's 1999." And honestly, Julie, I had no idea whatsoever to do with this kid. I mean, I was way out of my league, with no education in autism. And about that time, I'm just thinking about what I'm gonna do with him. All of a sudden, I see this body of light that's floating above his physical body. And it literally looked like a cutout of his little 4-year-old body, same size, same dimensions. And off of the foot of the light body, there was a little light tail, and it dropped right down into his head, and I could see it just dipped right down into his heart space, but that's as far as it went. And I kept rubbing my eyes, trying to get that to go away. I was like, you think all these weird thoughts, like, "I'm going crazy, what's happening?" And then it wouldn't go away, so I asked the logical question in my head. I was like, "What the heck am I seeing? Like, what is that?"
Because that was the first time you'd ever seen anything like that.
Never seen a light body. I didn't even know what a light body was. I was just describing it as a body of light because that's what it looked like, at the time.
Like a hologram almost of him?
Yeah, it was like literally like if you made out a cutout doll, but you just filled it with light, like white light. That's what it looked like. And, so I kind of was trying to get it to go away. It wouldn't. I asked, "What the heck am I seeing? What's going on here?" And the minute I asked the question in my head, I heard this little boy's voice in my head, and he said, "That's my light body. You're here to put my light body back into my physical body. You're here to help me integrate the 2." I was like, "I don't know what the heck you're talking about." I had no clue what he meant. I had no idea why he thought I had the mastery to be able to do that. But basically, what happened from that moment forward is he took me through a year-long process where he would come to me in dreams. He would bilocate and sit at the end of my bed and tell me things to bring and do. He would telepathically communicate with me. And at the end of that year, I pretty much I was applying everything all the way around, all the way along, as far as what he was asking me to do. And at the end of that year, I basically did a bit of a energy session, I guess is the best way to say it, on his behalf. I did it on my birthday, actually as a gift to myself, because it had been quite a year. And um and I went to see him physically the next day. And when I went to see him, he was completely verbally communicating. I walked in his house that day, and he was standing there was a staircase that came right down to the front door. He was standing at the top of it when his mother opened the door, and Riley's at the top, and he goes, "Hi, Susie, what are you doing?" And I was like, I was on my knees. Oh my God, it's like he's verbally communicating, he's purposely verbally communicating. And he basically grabbed my hand and took me into a room in his house, and we just talked and spelled and drew, and he was sharing me with me all kinds of information about what had shifted for him. And then he said in part of the writing that day, um, he said, "It's the most amazing advance. You love them," meaning, I guess, the kids, and he said, "Now advance the magic." And I still have those papers, like, laminated, written down. But that's basically what got me, like, off the speech pathology route and into the energy support or integration or multidimensional communicator, whatever you wanna call me now. And in that year, that very first year, there was so much changing in my life because I went from one worldview of, these kids are quote unquote disordered or something's wrong and, they need to be fixed, to, oh my gosh, we've got mastery here. We've got a level of awareness and consciousness that, I mean, if it can open up, a housewife from Maine at the time with 4 little kids, I'm thinking it can open up just about anybody. So that's what happened. I went from having during that year from a full-time speech pathology practice to a full-time healing practice, I guess is what it would have been called at the moment. And simply because I was just starting to talk to people in my community about, this wild kid that had just opened me up. And all of a sudden, there were just people coming in from everywhere with all kinds of different kids. So, yeah.
Because they were desperate to get some help and to get some understanding because they weren't getting it from their traditional caregivers would be, I would imagine, is what was going on.
Well, and if they don't, and not only were they not getting it from the traditional caregivers, but again, at that time in history, there was a lot less awareness about these kids. So, this is at a time where people were doctors, professionals. If you had a child diagnosed on the spectrum, it was like a death sentence. It's like your child will never do this and they'll never do that and they'll never. And here I come along with oh my gosh, I don't know I don't even want to look at what they necessarily can't do right now, but I'll tell you what they can do. And what they can do is they can invite us to another level of our own consciousness. They can invite us to capacities that exist within us that we didn't even know were there. And I've seen this thousands and thousands of families later, and it one after another, they feel like they're all, especially an invitation to their parents to, um, you might take up a spiritual journey or take up a journey into what is more unseen. Um, and everyone around them, if people will go along for the ride. So
What after that first time with Riley, over that year that you spent until he became communicative, I would say on a more normalized level, is that a way to put it?
yeah, it was
How did you rec how did he present things to you other than showing up his spirit in your room and sitting on the edge of your bed and all of that? How else did he let you know there was more to the story? Were there other occurrences when you were together that happened that you can share? Or was it primarily when you were apart and you were communicating with him when you were apart? How did all that unfold?
it was always any way and every way that I could be open to it. Like, so at first, at the very beginning, he was teaching me how to kind of stabilize his energy, how to invite his energy to have more of an interface with this human dimension. And of course, even the idea that we were going to merge these realities somehow, my question was, well, why are they separate in the first place? It's like, what does this actually mean? And so as I would start asking questions like that, he would telepathically give me that information. He would answer my questions. And because I'm a speech pathologist and because I was way out of my league in all of this, I I would always ask him to, you need to tell me, did I get this right? Like, is what's going on in my head, is the answer to the question accurate? And I would like, yes or no, hit my hand here for yes, no for here. Or I would put pictures down, yes or no. I just need a clear yes or no as to whether what I'm picking up telepathically is accurate. And so we went back and forth with him telling me exactly what to do, and then me naturally and organically having questions because why are we doing this? What are we doing? How will this work? Are you the only one that this will work with? Or will others benefit from this? And he would just answer me at least with a pointed yes or no during that first year. Yeah.
But he was communicating with you telepathically.
Mhm. He was
Yeah.
communicating telepathically, but the speech pathologist in me needed the validation that
Well,
I
yeah.
wasn't just making up stuff and, having, delusions or something like that. Um, so yeah, I mean, I asked him so many questions, why are these kids here? Why are they starting to come in mass? Because by 1999, we're getting a little bit more. And, by the late 90s, where that's climbing exponentially, like from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 500. and now we're like at 1 in 36. So there's a bigger evolutionary something happening, right? Um, we talked about vaccines, we talked about all kinds of different things in relationship to autism, or at least the things that were pertinent to that day. So, yeah, I can offer you a lot of information about what he shared there.
Yeah, I wanna go down that pathway
Mhm.
here in a few
Okay.
minutes, but let's take a couple of steps back. Had you come from a spiritual family? Were you spiritual or religious? Was this, like, totally out of left field for you, and it was something unlike anything you'd ever even heard or read about?
I had never heard or read about it for sure. I was raised, Presbyterian, I went to church, but mainly, in all honesty, for the donuts afterwards, or for the cookies, the snacks, right? So I didn't have um I will say that prior to that, I had gotten involved in a Gnostic Orthodox monastery. My husband's mother at the time was very involved with this Gnostic Orthodox tradition and the Essenes, and that there was something in that that over time resonated with me. At the beginning, I will say, I thought my ex-mother-in-law now was a little kooky, when I very first met her because she was into a lot of this stuff, and I mean, unbeknownst to my now ex-husband, I kinda became her on steroids, so yeah.
Well, and you were coming from a scientific background with all that alphabet soup in the form of those degrees after your name and proof-based and research-based, and here's how
Yeah,
you do it, and you
statistical
need to follow this
analysis.
model. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Did you have other children when you started working with Riley? Did you have other children that were then coming into your sphere of influence at the same time that you were working with Riley? And then were you parlaying what you were learning with him and use those new techniques with these other children?
Yeah, it was, I would say about the first 6 months or so, maybe 6 or even 8 months, um, it was more kinda like hit and miss, like I wasn't, um like I might take on a client for a little while and would try some of these things out with them, and sometimes it would work out and sometimes it wouldn't. But after I got past that 6 to 8-month period with Riley, then it just seemed like the kids were finding me, and because I was still functioning then as a pediatric speech pathologist, they were able to find me through that avenue, and so I was a little incognito, I guess you might say, at the beginning because, you know, they would all telepathically communicate with me. I couldn't always share, what I was picking up from the children with their parents. Some of the kids would say, "Yeah, go ahead and tell my mom, she'll totally get that because she has this experience too." Or other kids would say, "No, don't say anything because she won't get it, and then I won't be able to hang out with you anymore," kind of thing. So, yeah, and so then once that all started to happen and I felt more comfortable, you might say, at least in what I had access to and what had opened up within me, then I could start saying more about what I was doing because when you first start talking about this as a pediatric speech language pathologist, it's not very favorable. It's like, people don't, yeah, they weren't very happy with the idea that these kids were in there and they had capacities that we didn't know about, and I think it made people feel fairly uncomfortable, if I'm honest.
And yet they were led to bring their child to you.
Yeah, well, it's the parents were fine. It was more the professionals that I got
Oh,
the
okay.
backlash from.
Okay.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
parents and that's what I love about parents of kids on the spectrum. I mean, especially now, they're looking for what works. They're not, how many degrees you have after your name and that kind of stuff. They're looking for somebody who can make a heart-to-heart connection with their kids and to really see them. And, I'm beginning to realize how valuable that is as opposed to somebody coming in trying to fix their child.
I work with a fair number of mothers and grandmothers, primarily who have children or grandchildren on the spectrum. And they come to me because they're just frustrated with the whole care system. And they, I can't tell you, which is why I'm so excited to have you join us today. I can't tell you, I've lost count of how many of these women, my clients, every once in a while there'll be a dad on the call, but it's usually the women will say, I know my child's in there. I know I can communicate with him telepathically. I had one mom last week tell me that her child uses a letter board to communicate, which I'm assuming is he types out stuff on a letter, of the letters on the alphabet to spell things. Is that how those work?
It's actually, he's probably using spell to communicate, and spell to communicate is a particular form of it's not spelled out uh like a keypad or like on a computer or something like that or typing. It's but it is a board where the kids can point to the letters and spell out whatever they'd like to share. And because that's more like a gross motor skill, it's easier to organize their bodies to point and to share information that way than it is to organize articulation, which is a fine motor skill and is not, for a wide variety of reasons, that kind of communication, is not easy for the kids and
No,
kinda
she says
gets
it wears him out when he
yeah.
uses it. She says it's exhausting for him. But she is one of many who've told me that their children telepathically tell them about other realms that they go to, and they meet up with other kids who are on, using air quotes, spectrum. And this podcast, the telepathy tapes, that's pretty new out, and it's getting a lot of buzz because my clients are saying, my kid's been telling me for a long time about things that I'm hearing on these telepathy tapes, and there's no way that he's heard this information or seen this research. I imagine you've listened to those or are
I'm in them.
familiar with them.
Yeah.
You're in them. Okay.
I was featured in one of the episodes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's changing the whole zeitgeist as far as I'm concerned with what's going on here. And it's so remarkable to me that these children have been communicating these things to their parents over the years. And the parents are exhausted, most of them that I talk to, because in a lot of cases it's full-time care for them. And they don't have a lot of help from social agencies or others. If they have family members that can come over, sometimes that works, but sometimes the kids don't want the family members. They just want
Right.
the mom. And so by the time they're calling me, they're saying, "What can you do to help?" Because I I'm just at my wit's end. I adore this child. I'm doing everything I can, and I am just physically exhausted and emotionally exhausted. Speak to that. Do you find that that's the case, unfortunately, more often than not?
It is the case more often than not, but one of the challenges is that, again, parents have not been given adequate information as to who their children are and what their capacity actually is. Like I was saying, well into, the 2000s and even still today in a lot of experiences, parents are always told what their child is not. And there is an assumption because of the way they're diagnosed and because of the way they're placed in educational settings based on this diagnosis, there's a there's a preconceived idea or assumption that these kids are not in there and that the only thing that the parent can really do is take care of the body and take care of the behaviors. And so parents aren't getting appropriate information. And as the telepathy tapes has gone out in the world, and Kai and I were actually on a conversation this morning with somebody, an autistic savant that is staying at my house right now, actually. But she, what I was, what's happening now is you have all this information opening up that is letting people know your kid is in there. Your kid is telepathic, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much to this soul that's incarnated into this body. And these souls are having a very challenging time because they have skill sets that humanity has yet to evolve into. And they're coming into families who, through no fault of their own, misunderstand who their children are. So, any parent might spend a whole lifetime trying to figure out how to support their children, right? But if you have somebody who's a non speaker and you can't ask them or you don't think you can ask them those questions, you now you're at odds, with this child. Um, the whole experience is challenging. So we need better education. We need real education about who these children actually are, what their capacity is, and how a parent can start engaging with that capacity. And this is what we've been trying to bring to the forefront and trying to teach parents, and professionals for years now. And what's beautiful is when they really get it, of course, every mother loves their child and they just want to make that connection. Once they have the right formula, you might say, then all of a sudden, this life that is very challenging and it's 24/7 and it's exhausting. It becomes lighter and lighter. It becomes much easier. It becomes a spiritual journey or evolution in its own right. And that's where I get excited. It's like those old world realities or what's been taught and said. Yes, that's coming through a particular lens and a particular level of consciousness. But the kids aren't there. The kids the kids aren't in that place, but we treat them like they are all the time.
Nor have they ever been in that place, most likely.
No. Mm-mm.
Yeah. When you say that you're helping the parents to know who these kids are, know what they're capable of, and know that they're on a spiritual journey. Can you give us an idea? Can you give us some examples of who are these kids and why are they here? And what is it that you're trying to get the parents to understand?
So these kids, um, well, I'll start this the way I start one of my integration series classes. which is I have my story of autism, and then there's the story of autism out in the world. The story of autism out in the world is one of um, dysfunction or dis-ease or dysregulation, all the disses, right? And they're dissing the condition, they're dissing the child, right? My experience has, when I've asked them, okay, why are the numbers going up? Why are there so many? And the kids just said, we're coming because you asked for us. Humanity asked for a new type of human. They asked for a soul that could hold a higher frequency, um, a higher consciousness. You asked for more intuitive souls. You were asking for the patriarchal reality that had been for so long to move into more of a intuitive reality. And so from a soul level, we put this call out to these souls,
Who put the call out?
all of humanity.
Okay. But not necessarily cognizant that we were putting that call out.
Not necessarily cognizantly, but most of us, by the late 1980s, humanity had gotten so done with the old patriarchal kind of reality, the old, make it happen, get it done, go faster, make more money, do whatever. It was consciously or unconsciously, humanity started asking for something different. And these souls started hearing that call and they started coming in. The souls that first came in, like let's say 30, 40 years ago, had a really challenging time because they're coming in as you might say, as a very high frequency being, but they're coming into a reality that is divisive, separation, still deep in the get it done, make it happen kind of energy, not very intuitive, right? Still in the cognitive mind. And so those kids had a really hard time. I mean, they they weren't seen, they weren't heard, they weren't valued. And a lot of them were put in institutions. It was just, I mean, it's horrible, what happened when we know now that they were in there, right? So then you've got, and then over time you have more and more children that come in starting to answer this call. And the more and more souls that come in, the more we're beginning to see, okay, there's certain things that work for humanity and there's certain things that don't work for humanity. We know it because, once we hit like 1 in 500 or 1 in 200, definitely now, you think about all the things that have changed, Julie, since these kids started showing up in mass. There's not a person on the planet that just assumes that the doctor is the authority anymore. We ask all kinds of questions now that we didn't ask in 1999. We have all kinds of, the educational system has had to be completely revamped because we might have as many children in quote unquote special ed as we do in regular ed. It's like, so we're at this place now that it's like, I always say they came in like canaries in the coal mine and they were kind of showing us this is what works for us and this is what doesn't work for us. Like all of this food that we feed ourselves that might have dyes in it, might have sugars in it, might have stuff that's really not that great for an evolving humanity. Let's bring some awareness to that. So we have all of these souls coming in. And there is a theory through astrology and human design and even the gene keys. There's a theory that by 2027, every soul that comes in will have the operating system of an autistic individual, like an autistic operating system. That does not mean that those souls are going to look autistic, because the more information that's coming in, the easier it is getting for these souls that want to come in as these new humans to be able to come in and integrate from the get-go. And that's what we're seeing. If I can see like a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old or somebody who's just received a diagnosis, that's very different than seeing a 30-year-old that had to come into a much denser experience. Does that make sense?
Back to Riley. Where is Riley now? Are you still in touch with him? And then once he was at the top of the stairs when you went the day after your birthday to see him, did you continue to see him? Did he continue to progress in a normal, what again, I'm using air quote kind of thing, in a normal rate? Or was he still in special ed? Or was he like right there or above where his peers were in the 4 or 5-year-old class?
Well, the last time I saw him was probably about 6 years ago. He's in his late 20s now, um, early 30s, and the last time, I mean, if you saw him today, he looks like an autistic individual. The difference for Riley is that he was, unreliably communicating or not consistently communicating when I met him. He is now consistently and continues to be consistently, um, communicating. Again, that was 1999, from 99 to 2000, and so that was what was available as far as integration was concerned then. Different kids along the line have shown up in different ways, yep, since then, and what we see pretty much now is we see when it is the soul's choice. I mean, I can't, would not and cannot force a soul to do something that they don't have in their blueprint. But what is happening now, and especially since the telepathy tapes went out last year, especially since there's more awareness, what's happening now is kids who were non-speaking are now becoming spellers, or kids who are spellers are now becoming speakers, or so what it's just becoming easier and easier to share what's inside these kids, for them to share, and it's pretty profound. I gotta say, it blows me away what they're aware of and what they know, and the fact that they can telepathically communicate, I think is great, but it's that, like I say, it's the tip of the iceberg, because if you're a whole community on this planet of non-speakers, and if you have access to other realms and other realities, doesn't it make sense that you would meet in those other realms and realities? You might not be able to have a conversation in this density, but you can sure have it in other densities.
Which begs the question, there are lots of innovators and captains of industry and those who seem to have a brilliance that's off of any charts that we can measure at this time, who say that they're on the spectrum. They admit to it. And I'm wondering if they're able to channel information from source, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, and that helps them develop these things. Have you
Right.
run into that?
All the time. It's like, you know, the I and what I would say just a little bit differently, Julie, is that we see these kids through the lens of separation because we've been conditioned out of who we really are. We are usually reaching for God or source or some kind of unity. These souls are functioning from there. They're functioning from unity. And so doesn't it make sense that if we were all functioning from unity, doesn't it make sense that there's no separation, there's no division? I can talk to you telepathically because we're one. It's only because we perceive ourselves as separate that we think we have to get somewhere in order to telepathically communicate, right? So, but these kids this is part of the challenge. We're seeing them through the eyes of separation. They're seeing us basically through the eyes of love. They're seeing us through the eyes of unity. And, this healing beyond time and space, this telepathic communication, this ability to bilocate, all of these things does it makes sense if it's it's all points, you might say, within the whole.
Well, we all have the capability to do it. We forget that we can do it, and that's what I teach is how do you reignite that and then implement that into your life, and what I'm hearing you say, Susie, is these kids haven't ever disconnected from it. When I scan these kids energetically, and they all give me permission. Quote, "normal kids," well, a lot of times, because I always ask permission before I scan somebody, and I'm like a human MRI. I have never had and I've done this with hundreds of kids on the spectrum, primarily boys, which I wanna ask you about in a minute, but none of them have ever said, "No, you can't scan me," and the 2 things that I see, Susie, in my mind's eye that I help them clear so I'm in communication with them telepathically, they, like you, are showing me what needs help, and then I'll give their parents things for them to do to follow up on the physical side of the equation, but the 2 things I see, I would say close to 100% of the time are gut dysbiosis, candida overgrowth, mold exposure, leaky gut, and heavy metals, massive amounts of heavy metals. And I've often wondered if the heavy metals contribute to them, at least when they're really little, being able to be so telepathic. Does that have something to do with their frequency and their ability to communicate telepathically? Kind of like a radar or a satellite dish or something, because they're so right on, and then so we get the heavy metals out, and they'll tell me, "I don't need them anymore." Several of them have said, "I don't need them anymore."
Right,
Leads
right.
me to believe there's some correlation there with the heavy metals. Have you run into that as well?
That's an interesting thing to look at, and I will be on the lookout for that. I haven't seen the heavy metal part discussed that way, but that does make sense to me. What I hear that as more often than not is, because these souls are, um, you might say they're because their bodies are so much more refined than ours are in many ways, they're like canaries in the coal mine. Again, if they're showing us what isn't really helpful for an evolving human being, things like, um, the absorption of heavy metals, the absorption of toxicity through, vaccines is one of the versions, one of the ways that that might show up. But there are, again, if you're really sensitive to that kind of like mold and those kinds of things, that's going to have a disproportionate effect on some individuals than it would for others. Some people can be in a moldy house for their whole lives and it doesn't bother them in the least. But if you're coming in at a higher level of sensitivity, that's gonna be so I've seen the heavy metal piece more related to, vaccines and other toxicities that environmental toxicities, cleaning products, different things like that. I've seen it more in relationship to that particular piece than I have as a, um I do have a lot of kids suggesting that, like, a little bit more iron or a little bit more support, like, in the blood to help solidify them a little bit more can be helpful. But yeah, I'll look at that. That's yeah, I haven't thought about it quite like that.
When I see it in my mind's eye too, the heavy metals, and I do this with adults all the time as well, is they come out looking like a speck of glitter, both sparkly glitter and dull glitter, and they come out, you'll love this, as a nano strand that looks like a strand out of a pad of steel wool that you would use to scrub pots and pans in the kitchen. I don't even know if they still make steel wool. I mean, we always had steel wool when I was a kid, and they come out like that, and the thing that I hear so often from the kids is, "I don't need them anymore.
Right,
I
right.
don't
Yeah,
need them anymore." So they're fulfilling some kind of a
some
purpose going on.
purpose. Yeah.
The other thing that I hear a lot from them, and it's because they know I'm aware of it, this is in my sphere, is Walter O'Brien, the Irish businessman. You're familiar with him?
Just know the name, but
Yeah, for those of you that haven't heard of him, he's supposedly one of the smartest guys in the world, and he's founded I think he's invented 170 some tech devices, and he has started a company called Scorpion, and there was a TV show several years ago on CBS, I believe, and it was mirroring what he's done. He has a company where he will take primarily autistic boys, and I wanna come back to the boy thing, and they're off the charts brilliance-wise. Some of them are nonverbal, but just like wizards. They're so smart, and they work his customers are countries and military operations and global entities where they'll figure out what all the different scenarios are for the possibilities. Like, if we wanna do this marketing campaign, what are all the scenarios of how this is gonna help? If they're working for a military, I've heard him in an interview tell the story, like, the US military hired him when they were in Iraq, and what happens if the water supply gets poisoned? What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? And they put together, here are all these scenarios and here are all these remedies in the event that these scenarios happen. So they have all these plans, and these kids are not even all of them are young. I mean, some of them have been with him for 20 years, but they're so off the chart brilliant that they can write the programs and the algorithms and all of that. But the interesting thing about it is he's figured out a way where he'll have a project and he'll have several autistic employees, again, mostly boys, and he'll have what he calls the project manager a babysitter. And he said the project manager is normally a female, and the
yeah,
female is the one who has interactions with the client. They don't let the kids or the employees who are the geniuses interact with the clients. The project manager, or what he calls the babysitter, does, and the project manager can communicate with the kids telepathically. I keep saying kids, communicate with the autistic. It's fascinating. what he's put together. It's fascinating. So why is there not more of a push to utilize these brilliant people on the spectrum, number 1, and number 2, why are there so many more boys than girls?
Um, let's do the last question first. What I heard anyway is initially many more boys than girls. I think initially it was like 4 to 1, like back in 99 or something like that. But again, humanity had asked for souls to come in who were kind of beyond the patriarchy and beyond the cognitive, mental figuring out of everything. So now you have all these boys that, you've got these kids coming in male bodies, but who are highly intuitive, highly and it's not necessarily true that 4 to 1 exists now. It doesn't. There are many more. It's much more balanced than it has been in the past. So, and as far as I have witnessed, autism through the female expression definitely has differences than autism through the male expression.
As far as
So,
symptoms, you mean?
as far as symptoms, as far as many more individuals, at least that I've personally interacted with that were female, did have communication or do have some form of communication. They're more likely to have communication, at least in my experience, or at least in the pool of, people that I've worked with. So that's just part of it. I think it's just definitely the symptomology, definitely the biggest one for me is, with my old speech pathology hat on, is I'm looking at how that connection and communication is actually being made, right? So that's a little bit different. As far as why we don't utilize this population more is, um, is in all honesty, it's like we don't assume competence. We see a body that's dysregulated. And we very rarely professionals very rarely take the time to kinda go, "Okay, there's something beyond just our bodies," right? We are much more than just what we perceive ourselves to be. And I think that I think that's why the telepathy tapes coming out right now is brilliant because it's saying, "Look beyond the body because there's much more than you might think there is." And once you realize that, even that alone, you know, these kids haven't been seen or heard or valued or appreciated. I mean, a lot of them are in educational settings, they're still being given puzzles and sorting colors when they're 20 years old or 17 years old. It's like, and I can't even imagine being all in there, like, and not just being all in there, but having a real brilliance, a real capacity, um, and to have somebody say, "Sort your colors," over and over and over. It's like I'd be banging my head up against the wall too. You
Yeah, good
know, I
point.
would I would be acting out in all kinds of ways. If any one of us were put in similar conditions, we would have the same behaviors. Um, so, yeah, I think that we just don't assume competence. And I think humanity also, hopefully this is coming back now, but I think we've been talked out of our curiosity. It's like, instead of like, wow, it's, seeing somebody who's struggling and then saying, what kind of environment can we put you in that would make it less challenging for you? Like, what do I need to do to shift in order to have you be more comfortable kind of thing? It's like, we don't think about things like that. We've been more conditioned to kind of go, you're struggling. You don't look like we do. So let's see how we can figure out how to make that happen. Right. And then the kids just back up that much further. It's like, no, that's not what we came here for. So,
So, really, it's an opportunity for entrepreneurs who recognize that they can communicate telepathically with these people that are on the spectrum and figure out, like Walter O'Brien did, how do we utilize their brilliance to give them the opportunity to do that if that's what they want,
well, I think that last piece is very, very important. Is that what they want?
if that's what they
Because
want.
because I think the other piece of this is, when we find out that there is a brilliance there, I mean, a lot of these kids have said, we're the new science, the new medicine, the new education, the new technology, we can we can do all these things. But again, if we see the brilliance and then we in any way exploit that brilliance, or if we see the brilliance and then we still try to put that brilliance back into how we think that should be utilized in the world, we're still negating their beautiful voices. And I've watched this, Julie, it's that when these kids actually get to the place where they feel safe enough and comfortable enough to actually share what they truly know about themselves. It's like the poetry that comes out of these kids, the philosophy, the the science that might help not just a certain organization, but humanity as a whole. It's just, quite frankly, I mean, that's why I'm in it. That's why I keep going because it's just breathtaking. It makes me realize that we can see this population through the lens of humanity's getting quote unquote sicker and sicker and sicker, right? Or we can look at this at, oh my gosh, I have an invitation to move my awareness, to expand my awareness. And then I see this brilliance that could actually help humanity.
Right.
I mean, not just on a vibrational, not just souls coming into the body, which is enough, but if that soul is recognized in that body for that brilliance will come into manifestation and it will change the world for the better.
I
Yeah.
agree. And they're not contained in you've gotta think in the inside this box, which
Right.
is where all the great inventions have come
Right.
from
Right.
people who can think outside of the box. I'm an inventor of surgical devices and former manufacturer of them sold throughout the world. I have a degree in communications. I
Yeah.
don't know engineering. I don't know any of that stuff. I could hire those guys, which is what I did. But I'm an example, and I'm not on the spectrum, but I'm an example of thinking outside of the box. My engineers that I hired, there were many times where they'd say, "Well, that can't be done." I'd say, "Why not?" They'd say, "Well, it's not been done before." I said, "So what? Figure it out. This can't be done. Why not?" Because I wasn't thinking inside of the box in which they were trained because I didn't have that training, which ended up being something that was very advantageous, and I look at the same situation with these brilliant minds. So, who cares if they're nonverbal? If they're brilliant and they're coming in with new ideas, to your point about what can help humanity in general,
Mhm.
if they
Yeah.
wanna participate, let's utilize them. Let's come up with a way to integrate them into entrepreneurial ventures perhaps, because that's gonna be easier than trying to integrate them into the regular corporate structure, and
Yeah, they
let's
wouldn't go there anyway.
yeah. Well,
I
yeah.
mean, most they just won't go there because because that regular corporate structure is back to the old patriarchal kind of reality of of, um yeah, they just, at least the kids I've worked with, they just wouldn't put themselves in those positions, right?
I don't
They
think the
want to.
corporations would allow them to. So I think it's a moot point. I don't think the
Yeah, I think
corporations would know what to do with that. They just
no, and again, it's again a matter of perception because the corporate identity will look at things through that lens and probably, maybe, but probably not be able to see the opportunities that are available. Um, but I think that one of the things that's really important to really hold on to here is these individuals, they didn't come here to be like us. When you say out of the box and thinking out of the box, they take that to a whole different level, right? Which is amazing. And to me, it's like if we'll be open to learning from them and experiencing the wild ride, quite frankly, that they want to take us on, it's it it does reorient our way of thinking so that and over time we can literally kind of perceive through that lens of what really supports the whole, what really supports all versus what supports a particular industry or a particular, you know? And so this is the part that I get really excited about. And I can say without a doubt that, I mean, some of the strangest and most um, initially disconcerting experiences that I've had with them have also been the experiences that led me to be able to have even a deeper connection with them because it opened me to maybe processing or thinking more like they do, and I think it's that's the invitation at hand. I think we're in we're in uncharted territory, you might say. It's like and the beautiful thing is that more and more people have more and more curiosity right now, and what I do know about this population is if we're heartfelt asking, "How can I help? How can I be of service? How can I evolve to make better connections so it's easier for you?" Just like the gentleman who had the dream with his son, these kids will find a way to connect and communicate, and it's not rocket science. It's heart, it's love, it's I believe in you and I know that you're in there and I just want some kind of connection. Yeah. It happens more often than not when it comes from that deep willingness to open to what might beyond our comfort zone. So,
I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but in the meantime, we're gonna have to have you back to continue the conversation, especially as this evolves. I think the zeitgeist is shifting. You know it. You're part of the drivetrain that's getting it to shift, quite frankly and obviously. One last question, why do we incarnate?
to have an experience. It's like I don't think it's much more we make it more complicated than that, but I think that, we incarnate to have a human experience. It's that simple, and I think we've all incarnated right here, right now, because this is a huge transformation in collective human consciousness. I mean, what better experience to have than to actually be on the ground watching that transformation. And these kids are a huge part of that. Not the only part of it, but they're a huge part of that. And, yeah, we're here for the ride.
God bless you, Suzy Miller. My goodness, you are just you're a powerhouse in a little body, and you are remarkable in the work that you're doing. I told Suzy, everybody, before we started recording, I said, I've been one of your fangirls for a long time, and you didn't know I existed before today. But I just am in awe of you and the work that you're doing and how you're helping so many people, not only the ones who are your clients, but my goodness, your work has spread internationally. And I almost get a little weepy when I think about, how.
Well, this population, these kids, your that contribution every time you interact with them, it's like, yeah, we're all part of this field together. Yeah.
And I talk to moms and grandmothers multiple times a month, sometimes
Mhm.
at least once a week
Yeah,
or
that's
more.
awesome.
That has and they've exhausted a lot to what we talked about before, they've exhausted a lot of other things, and so they come to you or they come to somebody like me who sends them to somebody like you then to help them further, and it's really just being of service to these people to help the families and help the kids too at that
Yeah.
point. How can people learn more about you and your work?
Best place to find me is at SuzyMiller.com, and I'm SUZY Miller.com. So, yeah, that's where everything is.
Yeah, sounds like the all-American name, Suzy Miller.
Suzy
I love
Miller.
it. Yeah. Alrighty, everybody. Wow. I know this is gonna be interesting and new to a lot of you, which is why I was so eager to have Suzy come on and tell us about this side of this portion of humanity that seems to be more prevalent than ever before. So, in the meantime, we're sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama, mwah! And from Arizona too, where Suzy is. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.